Peter, how you doing? 2025, already into June. Where did the year go?
Where did the year go? It is wild. We're already essentially halfway through the year.
Yeah.
And I think it's really funny. It's not funny. It's a very real challenge that's facing everybody at this point, as far as not only are 2026 budgets being finalized and locked in, but 2026 growth and site plans and openings are already starting to get scheduled.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's so much uncertainty. We talked about it last week. There's so much uncertainty, obviously, going on internationally, domestically. Interest rates are still relatively high. They haven't come down. Are they going to come down? What's going on with tariffs? And I think it must make it very difficult if you're an executive to think about growth. That's obviously a big bet. Real estate is expensive. You're in the wrong spot. It's the most expensive thing, which is one of the reasons Buxton has a business, right? But that's helping make sure you avoid those expensive misses. But it's challenging. What do we do?
Yeah.
How do we handle it?
It's a challenge for sure. And whether it's first gen growth, and to your point, new build projects are all slow because of supply chain issues and certainly because of capital constraints. And so a lot of clients that bank on going into that next shopping center or that next medical office complex that's coming out of the ground is finding they've got to sit on their hands for a while because the project's just not going as quickly.
And that's the debate, right? That's the debate in the room. Everything that you look at would make you feel like we need to not do anything. And yet they know that their competitors are probably going to do something. And having been at Buxton 20 years, right? I remember in 2008, when obviously you had mortgage crisis and everything that happened there and people were scared and they stopped growing. You had COVID. What was that going to be? And even as you got sort of out of COVID into 21, you still had people that, I don't want to do it. But some did. And what typically happened is the ones that were smart about where they went, but they were still aggressive in that, and they had analytics be with them to give them more confidence to make those kind of big bets. They ended up coming out ahead. I even think back to, when that was happening in 2008, you would read all these articles about the Great Depression and like Coca-Cola. And this can seem like a random kind of whatever, but that Coca-Cola during the Great Depression really increased their marketing spend. Everybody else pulled back and they increased their marketing spend. And they talked about how that was so beneficial because, in fact, because no one else was spending, they really stood out and helped build their brand and they kept moving forward. And obviously that's a big risk, but I think the same about growth. Your competitors are thinking about these things. And so even with all of this uncertainty, as you think about 26, you got to grow. If you're not growing, you're dying slowly, right? And so but how do you do that in the best way?
Yeah. I mean, even Warren Buffett said, be bold when others are fearful and be fearful when others are bold.
Right.
And these days, I think it's never been more true, but being able to do so with that higher degree of confidence, just by using all the data and the tools and the analytics and the experience that's available to help just be that much more confident in terms of when you should go forward or perhaps when maybe you want to pass on an opportunity because there's something that works out.
Yeah. And so when you grow, and talking about healthcare companies growing, be they a system or be they just a for-profit healthcare company, when you're growing, you essentially have two opportunities, right? Whether it's de novo or if it's an M&A, but you still have two. Do you go into new markets and or do you infill into existing markets? And so a couple things I want to ask you about too. The thing when you go into a new market is, well, how do I find the people that look like my best people here in these existing markets? Because these are brand new markets that have never been there. And then if I'm going to infill, if I'm going to put more locations in the existing market, the biggest thing that always happens is, you're going to be too close. You're going to cannibalize. You're going to overlap, and you get people internally fighting. You can't put that here. You're going to hurt this location that's over here. And those things are real if you mess it up. But those are things that if you don't do anything, competitors are going to come in and take the locations in the new market, or they're going to go into the area that you don't want them to go in your existing markets. So how do you get past that?
I mean, I think one of the things to the first question of, well, how do we replicate success in new markets? Well, it all goes back to who is that ideal consumer? Who is the person or the household that I can prove drives my business forward or drives my service line forward? And that's one of the beauties of how we think about learning and profiling and proving with data. Here's who you do best with. Like, it's not conjecture, it's not opinion, it's fact. Yeah. But then being able to translate that to any other market in the country, to be able to know with confidence that these don't just look like my kind of people based on their demographics, but based on their behavior, based on the way they consume and the way they live their lives. And being able to know these really are my kind of people that just simply haven't had a chance to experience my brand or my offering yet. And therefore, if we can, if nothing else, build a strategy around being the most convenient option to the greatest number of the right kind of people, that's already getting you a long way down the path of how you can evaluate new market opportunities when you think about growth mandates that anybody's facing.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think, we've seen it so often, forever. Really, when you have companies that are just starting out, or even a health system that's only been in this one market, they're like, I know my markets. Mm-hmm. You know what? A lot of times that's true.
Yep.
You've grown up in that area, or you've lived in that area a long time, your people have, and you know sort of the pockets that would fit for the types of services you're putting there. The problem is, and where you start to need something like Buxton, is when you get outside of that. And that is interesting, right? Because some people get scared, right? I don't know these markets. And then what they'll typically do, and you mentioned a second ago, is they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to just use the demographics. What is the age and the income of the people? But that's one of the biggest ways to make a mistake. Full pause, right? So just let that sink in. What do you mean by that? Demographics tells some of the story, but you said the best word, translate. What do you do well here, and how do we translate where those types of opportunities are in a new market that you've never been in? Translate is the key, right? When you're international, you go to Spain on vacation or whatever, most of the stuff's in Spanish. It's not in English. You need to translate to be able to understand what's going on. You can't just take your English language and plant it in Spain, and they speak English, but you know what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying. You have to translate it. And so demographics doesn't translate perfectly. It's like trying to use English in a foreign country. Yeah, sometimes they'll be able to speak it, but you're not going to be nearly as effective as if you knew their language. And so that's what all of the other data is. So think about like life stage, right? Or excuse me, think about cost of living. That's what I really wanted to talk about, like cost of living. So when we ask people all the time, we're like, hey, what do you look for demographically? They're like, our average patient or consumer for this particular service is between 35 and 45, and they make this income, blah, blah, blah. My next question is always, where? Mm-hmm. And they always kind of go, well, what do you mean? Well, where do they make that income? Yep. I still don't understand what you're talking about. Well, let's say it was $100,000 a year to look for. $100,000 a year in a suburb of San Antonio, Texas, goes way further than San Diego, California. So if you want to go to San Diego, California, and you go look for a bunch of people that have $100,000, because demographically that's the same language, that's what that is, you're going to fail miserably, because those people, the cost of living in San Diego is so much higher that, in fact, to find somebody comparable from a disposable income standpoint for this particular elective service or whatever it is, they need to make it $200,000. So there are segmentation systems and psychographics and all these types of things to be able to help you understand who you do best with, and then go find them in other markets. But you know that when you see that person in that market, they're adjusted based on life stage and dollars to be able to be comparable to what this is in this market. Yep. Translate English, Spanish. See, use that next time. That'd be good.
Well, even in existing markets. So that's an area that's perhaps a little more challenging sometimes to navigate, even in internal committees, because well, everybody knows the market, and therefore everybody has an opinion. Because right or wrong, like you live there and you know what you know. And sometimes, not every organization is this way, but sometimes just the loudest voice in the room ends up winning simply because they dominate the conversation. And one of the challenges a lot of our healthcare providers have, or our healthcare clients have, is you've got a lot of varied experience and different perspectives in that decision-making process. And God knows we need more healthcare providers out there doing that hands-on patient work every day. But the reality is a lot of those doctors and nurses and advanced practice providers, they didn't go to business school. They haven't done a lot of real estate transactions. They haven't run a bunch of large-scale, multifaceted marketing campaigns. And so what works in a clinical setting doesn't always work out in the real world. And so, one of the things that I think a lot of our clients do is leverage the data, not just on the households, but on the market, on the competition, on all of those other factors, the co-tenants, the traffic, to layer that together, just to shift that conversation a little more from, well, I think or I feel, to I know, and here's the data to back.
That's right. And that's the thing, when you're making a decision like putting an additional location in a market that you're already in, you do get people fighting. Somebody's going to say that's too close. Somebody's going to say, no, we have to do it. Mm-hmm. And every organization's a little bit different, but typically you have incentives within those different departments that are competing with each other, right? If you are focused on operations within a market, it may be that your bonus plan is based on, comp gains, right? Hey, my traffic at my existing locations increased by X%. And so if your bonus is based on that, the last thing you want is another location in there that could potentially take some traffic away from an existing location. But if you're the real estate department, your bonus is based on opening up a bunch of additional locations. So that immediately puts you into conflict, right? What we see is that unless you have analytics to help with the answers, you just have gridlock. You talked about it. You have the log jam of opinion, and then the loudest voice in the room wins on what to do, and that might not always be the best voice. And so, when you have analytics, instead of having a location that could be 10 minutes from another location, and it may overlap the existing location's trade area by 20%, and all the households, and you're overlapping 20% of the households. You can't do that. And it's like, well, yeah, but I might only be cannibalizing like 2% of the visits, because the people that live on the edge of this trade area, the data shows they're not coming into this location at nearly the percentage or the penetration that they are closer in, which makes sense, right? There's a penetration decay. So in fact, while I may be overlapping 20% of the trade area or the households in the trade area of this existing location with my new location, I'm only cannibalizing like 2% of the visits. And in fact, by putting a location that's now closer to those people on the edge of the existing location, right? They're now much more likely to come in. So I'm gaining 20% traffic from this area to this new location, and I'm only losing 2%, right? So that data allows them to make that decision. And the fact of the matter is, if they don't take that location, somebody else is going to take it. Somebody else is going to take it. So you have to be aggressive or you're going to get eaten alive. But yes, you don't want to cannibalize, but that's where data and analytics come into play to help give you the confidence to make those decisions.
Well, just think about one of those other challenges of growth is, and all of that is great and it's all real, but that assumes you've got the supply to meet the demand in terms of why you're going there in the first place. And that's not always true with a lot of organizations. And think about all the times we've heard somebody say, I had a great site, everybody agrees, and then the deal falls apart because we don't have anybody to staff it. Mm-hmm. And so, let's think a little bit about, well, how can we bring the talent or the recruitment or the, even to a degree, HR portion of an organization into this team approach beyond just, well, real estate's going to find the site, clinical operations is going to run the site.
Right. I mean, that we talked about that in last week's get together, right? That basically You have to have all these things as part of your growth approach, but using the same analytics that can help you find the good new locations also, as we talked about, help you evaluate the performance of your existing locations. And so you might have some that are not doing well. One, when you look at it, you know what? It's doing as well as it could be doing. Trade area has changed over time. Everything's moved this way. No matter what you do, it's not the management, it's not the staff, it's not the quality, it's not the marketing. There's just not enough potential to be successful. Conversely, you could have another location that's doing the exact volume, but it does have a high concentration of the right kind of people, and the competition is not too high, and the referring providers are potentially there. So something operationally or physically in the building is holding you back from that. Those are two different strategies. But if I have physicians over here in the one that there's not a lot of potential in trade anymore, well, okay, let's move those physicians into areas, be they new locations, be they relocated locations, where they can be more successful. Because the fact of the matter is, just like if you don't take that new location because you're worried that it's going to cannibalize your existing location too much, and your competition will take them, if you leave physicians in poor performing clinics that don't have a lot of potential, they're going to go anyway.
Yep.
So it all works together. But and then the people that are moving forward and being aggressive, again, as we talked about, in this kind of very difficult time, not making light on that. That's why you need analytics to help guide you through. But you got to be aggressive, because there are going to be people that are growing and aggressive. And if you're kind of standing on your heels, you're going to get eaten alive. It's just reality.
I think one other thing that recently has come up in multiple conversations is the topic of competition, and how you can't not be hyper aware of, well, who's trying to get the same volume, or who's trying to take my volume within any given trade area or any given market. But I think everybody eventually agrees that, well, not all competition is the same, because think about any given business. Yes, there might be 5 competing clinics within a 10-minute drive of your facility or where you're thinking about going. And of course, in Scout, you can answer that in 3 seconds. But are all those clinics the same? Do they have the same number of providers? Which of course we can answer. What about their ratings? Like, what does the patient or potential patient think when they're making that decision on, well, who should I go and reach out to try and seek care? Because we all do it in our day-to-day life. We let reviews and ratings and other people's feedback influence where and why we do the things we do. And healthcare is no different.
100%. People we talked about you pull out your phone, and you can evaluate everything anymore.
Yep.
And so you have to. It's amazing. I mean, you have to be growing. You have to be aggressive about this. But again, you do have to take these things into consideration, because there's no bigger expense than missing, right? Not only is it the cost of missing on that real estate investment, it's also you're putting physicians and other staff in a facility that is not going to do well, and they're going to eventually leave, and that's very costly as well. So there's just too much data available it's easy to be successful. And one thing too, when you're talking about infilling new locations, which are infilling for particular services, right? It makes marketing easier. If I have one location in a new market, some of the things like radio or TV or some of the other things that, you might do in a big market, you can't do.
Yeah. Or vice versa. But
if I can, the cost to do a TV spot or the cost to do a radio spot, right? Or whatever that kind of electronic large media is, if I have 12 urgent care locations in the market versus 6, the cost to do that commercial is the same regardless.
Yep.
But if I can divide that cost by 12 versus 6, all of a sudden it becomes a different animal. So and what we also have seen, whether it's retail or healthcare, in a lot of cases, and not always, but a lot, is a rising tide sort of lifts all boats. The more locations you can put in a market strategically placed, that's signage. People see the sign, they're driving by with it. That builds up the brand awareness and can make it be better. So if you're holding on and you're at 3 and your competitors at 3, and then the next year they add 5 in your market, the cost to do the commercial becomes cheaper on a per unit basis, even though the cost didn't drop.
Mhm.
The impression frequency builds up, and you took your foot off the gas while somebody else, floored it.
Yep.
Things can change pretty quickly. And so that's not to be scary. That's not to, it's just, between the two of us, we've probably been here 35 years combined. We've just seen it. We've seen it time and again in retail and in healthcare.
Yep.
And you got to go. And there's data and there's analytics to help you do that.
It tells the story internally and externally.
That's right.
To the providers, to the brokers.
And that's funny you say, because I was thinking about this when I talked this earlier, but it's like healthcare is funny, right? Because in actually practicing healthcare, it's like, what do the tests say? What does the blood work say? What does the data say? Let's really look at that. But then sometimes those same people can be like, what are you talking about? We pull from 50 miles away because Betty Sue comes in once a quarter to get her blood work done, whatever. Well, maybe she does, but nobody else does. So you don't really pull from 50 miles. You pull from 15 minutes. And so, you use the data. What does the data tell you? And the data can absolutely tell you that, 80% of your patients come from 15 minutes on average. And here's who they are. And here's where everybody else's looks just like it that you're not getting, either in an existing market or a new market. And that can help. But physicians are great too, because they may have strong opinions, right? And they may say, well, Betty Sue, we pull from 50 miles because Betty Sue, but they're also so accustomed to using data that when they see data, they go, that says that actually she does come from there, but most people don't. They come from within 15 minutes. They go
0.001% of that population.
They go, okay, well, that makes sense. And they then get with the program. So if you don't have data, trying to convince a doctor who may be the strongest voice in the room, it might not happen, but they will with data.
Yeah. I think the last thing on how it all comes together, because each of these are really important pieces of the puzzle, but they're individual pieces, or to use a different analogy, they're all different tools in a bigger toolbox. And so how do you think that some of the stronger performing, faster growing, just more notable companies are able to tie those together in a more efficient way? In terms of just what does that process look like, or how does it all come together faster? I guess is really what I'm trying to do.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, you know the answer. Tell me.
Well, I think, in terms of just taking all of that, and yes, each piece is important and valuable, but that's where we're the two most biased people on this webinar, but it's combining those together into that consolidated singular output.
That's right.
That is easy to understand, it's easy to distribute, but it's really dense in terms of what's underneath the surface to help inform the why that is really driving the where that growth is going to come.
I think that's, again, we like to do these just because we talk about trends and things that we see, and to the degree that's helpful for people, hopefully it in some way is or not. We try not to make this a commercial for us, but I would say that whether you use Buxton or you do it yourself or whatever, you need to do something. But what you just raised is a very interesting issue, right? There's a lot of data out there. That's the science.
What do you do with it?
There's an art to know what to do with it, right? And so you can hire a bunch of PhDs and you can buy all the data and buy all the software and build that up over a period of time and kind of create some of this. Or you can utilize Buxton, and we can help you with that and get you set up way faster for less. And then if your PhD leaves, it doesn't hurt you, right? Because we have 250 people as a company. So I'm going to stop being, but the reason that I bring that up is to say that it's not enough to just have data. It's not enough to just have software. It's not enough. You got to know what to do with that to make it easy on you, the end user, right? Tell me what's important and let me push a button and get that answer all the time, right? And that's, so when we've created that for our clients, that they can push buttons or visualize things very quickly and get to that increased confidence and increased speed and breaking down the logjam opinion. There's a lot of stuff to back it up, and we stay with you to explain those things, right? And to be your professional partner in that, so that you always feel like you have somebody that's been there and done that. We've seen a lot of things. We can help with that, but you have to get to tell me the answer.
Yep.
And that's essentially what we do, and you could do. You got to do it because you got to have the answers, because other people have the answer. We're obviously happy to help if you want that.
Well, this has been awesome. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it as always. It's fun working through this, and it's a bit cheesy, but it's how I roll. It reminds me of Jerry Maguire. Help me, help you. Just
I
help
thought
me.
you were going to
help
say.
you.
I thought you were going to say the human head weighs 8 pounds.
Well, that's fact
So,
too.
okay.
But
So,
anyway, this is awesome.
all right, man.
I
Good
appreciate
to see you.
it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
Yep.
To learn more about Buxton, visit our website at buxtonco.com.